Hey guys, did you hear that President Trump tweeted that he asked South Korean President Moon Jae-in how Rocket Man is doing? Which is referring to Kim Jong-un.
Jesus. Rocket Man!
Hello everyone, welcome to episode 3 of Trending Left. My name's Samuel Birdsall.
I'm Marco Guajardo.
I'm Nicholas Cobb.
And I'm Andrew Herrera.
So first on the docket today is 9/11 happened 16 years ago, and I just want to extend our condolences to all the families that were affected and to the tragedy that it still affects our national psyche.
Yeah.
I remember that day I was homeschooled at the time, just watching, my dad was watching it for hours, and I was just sitting in the background. I couldn't understand the full import, but I knew something huge was going on, and I didn't understand just how huge, but clearly it was, a biblical scale. So.
Right. I mean, the politics of 9/11 are still affecting the way we talk about a lot of issues today. So it's important to recognize that, and our thoughts go out to those still suffering from this tragedy.
Okay, so this week, Chris Kobach, the head of President Trump's investigation into voter fraud, which is basically an excuse for him to be, there were 3 million illegal immigrants who voted, and to tighten voter restrictions, defended his claim that voter rolls in New Hampshire were compromised.
Yeah, we've had this conversation before. There were those reports earlier in the year where Trump, because Kelly Ayotte, the former senator from New Hampshire, the one who lost last year to Maggie Hassan, she had been coordinating Trump's inauguration or something, or his transition to Capitol Hill or something, and Trump had reportedly in the room said, Kelly, you would have been in the Senate had it not been for those illegal votes from Massachusetts or from wherever these votes came from.
Oh my God.
The Voter Fraud Commission is the biggest joke, one of the biggest jokes of this administration right now. It is absurdly racist. It is absurdly prejudiced towards voters of color, people of color that are voting. It really just it defies words. So anyone want to chime in?
I mean, it's dangerous because it feeds into the deep state sort of Alex Jones type ideology. These people that are clinging on to the Pizzagate theory and the idea that Hillary is a literal demon, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
The idea that there is some deeply rooted conspiracy that prevents them from being given the presidency or given a voice in our country.
Or the popular vote.
And those are dangerous ideas because obviously they erode our democracy. They erode the very idea of what this country is founded upon, right? Which we've seen before with the whole Al Gore Bush fiasco. There are times where conservatives in our country have undermined liberal victories, as we've also seen with President Obama's Supreme Court pick being literally stolen from him by the legislative branch. They continuously use the system and abuse the system in a way to gather power to make themselves look like martyrs, like people who are being victimized, when they really aren't. We've said time and time again on the podcast and in our own personal conversations, the real fight that we're seeing here is not between liberals and conservatives. It's not between some deep state, New World Order and the American patriots. It's between people who are continuously abusing the system, either for political gain, for monetary gain, and everyone else. And that defies political ideology. That defies race. It's just about people who are destroying our democracy versus everyone else who needs to be a part of saving it.
Yeah, I kind of see it as more of a class struggle.
That's
Absolutely.
another thing that it parallels.
Yeah, exactly. The super rich versus everybody else. We essentially have an oligarchy rather than a democracy, and that's actually something that's been supported by multiple Harvard political scientists. And
Lawrence Lessig talks about that all the time.
Yeah, it's pretty frightening. All right.
Yeah.
So, in terms of good news, so the GOP all across the country. Representatives are deciding not to run again.
Yeah.
And that's a testament to, dwindling support. They're clearly able to read the political wind and know they need to get out.
Yeah,
so
and
that's a very good sign.
it's not only Trump's base, it's also just what we generally see as far as like political trends go. The incumbent party does worse in midterm elections.
Right.
I mean, we saw that with Obama. We saw it previously with Clinton, with Reagan. I mean, it's how it works. So,
Yeah.
But it's being amplified by Trump's divisive rhetoric and politics, as well as what congressional leadership has been doing.
Right. So I mean, these incumbents have to worry. There is the leftward wave, but they also have to worry about their own base going crazy about whether it's Trump doesn't have enough wins, or you're not working with Trump enough, or Trump isn't conservative enough for us anymore, because now we're going to talk about this later with some of these deals with Democrats. And these incumbents are facing the pressure. Like,
Yeah,
people,
they're facing like more conservative primary
yeah,
opponents. Yeah,
right. So like, not only are some of these guys going to have tough, qualified, probably popular Democratic opponents, they're also going to have opponents in their own primary that are going to run to their right and say things and advocate for things that most sensible Republicans wouldn't even think about. This isn't a case of a GOP retiring, but in the Alabama Senate race, I mean, Luther Strange, who is by no means a moderate, this is a very, very conservative individual, is being ran to his right by another more and more conservative individual in his own primary. So, Republicans are not only not safe from Democrats, they're not safe from themselves. So, and this whole retirement thing is also just exacerbating that.
Yeah, and I know we kind of wanted to talk a little bit about a lot of legislative wins that the Democrats have been having recently at the state level, all across the country in districts that Trump won by like 20 points.
Yeah.
You have, I saw one legislative seat that was won in Oklahoma. It was a district, this same guy had run in the previous primary, or previous general election, and had lost by 20 points. This time he won by 20 points. It's a 40-point swing, which is incredible.
In a state like Oklahoma.
In a state like Oklahoma, where Democrats don't normally
happen.
win. And I think it's important that we focus going forward, the Democratic Party and the Democratic leadership, that, yes, this is great. We're capitalizing off the Trump wave. We're capitalizing off just generally how bad Republicans are seeming right now. But that doesn't mean that we're capitalizing off how Democrats seem, right? We're not we're not saying the Democrats look
Well, I guess it depends.
like a changed party now,
Well, it
because
depends.
they don't.
It depends on like what are the dynamics of this race. Obviously, the particulars of this Oklahoma House race. Like, we have no idea what it was like. Maybe in this race, these people are starting to see Democrats as like a changing force. Maybe this Democrat in Oklahoma ran as like a brand new Democrat, or like a more. I'm not sure how he ran. Obviously, that's why I'm speculating, but. A lot of these races are truly local. It depends on what kind of Democrat, or how the person presents themselves. But of course, overhanging in all of this is messaging going forward, capitalizing on these wins, and just crafting that message. So,
as far as specific Democratic policies that people are putting forward, the Medicare for All bill. 15 Democratic senators have already signed on to it, which I am beyond excited about. And they include many of the party's prospective 2020 presidential candidates.
Yeah,
so
we can talk about the caveats there, as far as that goes. I mean, I can't even put into words how optimistic I am as far as this bill being released with this much support. You have a lot of people, like you're saying, who are 2020 prospects, who are trying to capitalize a little bit off of how popular it is with the base right now, which in a lot of ways I'm fine with. I understand that people obviously run on politics. People are pushed to the left by political pressure. It's understandable.
But if it gets it passed,
If it gets it passed one day, it does get it passed. But we also need to be on the flip side of that, holding our legislators responsible, saying that you should be supporting the best possible policies for your constituents, regardless of what the donors are trying to get you to do, before it becomes popular because of the most popular senator in America. It's just, I'm so optimistic for what we can see going forward in a Republican-controlled Congress where we have this much support. Imagine if Democrats had a mandate, had a real message out there, we're getting legislative victories all across the country. We could see this thing in a decade, optimistically, in 2 decades for sure. And to me, that is the key here. We're seeing progressivism at its finest. We're seeing a policy that, Bernie Sanders has been fighting for since, forever. There's tons of videos coming out of him now in like 1992 talking about how this is necessary. It's just, it's so hopeful to see that we could possibly have real progress come to America very soon.
yeah, let's just hope that this does sway our party leadership in that direction. obviously a lot of this change has to come from within. And
Yeah.
I mean, 15. I think the number now is 17 Democratic senators is a great way to start.
Including Sanders.
Because because I mean, this is a third of the Democratic caucus. You know, some of these guys are not real national names. Some of these people are not even people running for president in 2020. So
Yeah, and I could see even a few more people joining on, like Amy Klobuchar. I think Sherrod Brown
you can almost count Klobuchar in. I think she's just waiting for that announcement.
I think Sherrod Brown is more of a 50-50 chance because of how he sees himself in his election race. It's pretty close, but I could also see him supporting it.
Right.
A few more people, yeah. Patty Murray.
Right. And it's just about what can these 17 do to sway the leadership at all levels, right? Because we have the House leadership that is a little bit more on the skeptical side,
but
or
even
less
there
interested.
we're seeing much higher rates of support. We have, what is it, like
Connor's bill,
170, 176, somewhere in that number is what I remember as far as like co-sponsors for that bill out of all the Senate Democrats, House Democrats.
Is the number 176 or is it 76?
It's like 170. Yeah.
Well, that's the vast majority of the caucus.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it's that high.
Okay. That's the vast majority of the caucus right there.
Yeah, but I mean, even then, you have like Steny Hoyer and like Nancy Pelosi saying that it's not what you need to do right now. It's like you've protected Obamacare.
Right.
Activists right now have protected Obamacare. It's not going to be repealed without a fight. You know that. So fight for something else going forward.
We need something for our party, a message to move forward, so people stay excited about the Democratic Party, and this is certainly one way to do it.
Right.
Yeah. It's also relevant that the Republicans are again trying to slip another health care bill through while
That's
people aren't
right.
paying attention.
That's right.
And this one's not really getting much publicity, and I don't know too much about it, frankly. But this just kind of gives a testament to their underhanded sort of tricks of trying to scheme and get past, and not be representative of the people. So.
Yeah, I think America's just sick and tired of that. I think they've seen these underplayed, underpublicized attempts to repeal and replace Obamacare, and Americans see that as the worst part of Washington politics. There is a point to both sides being upset about the way things are handled in the back door. So, I think this Medicare for All bill being so publicized as it is, and having so many people supporting it and making great comments about it, I think whether you're an American that agrees with single payer or not, I think you can admire that, hey, these guys are actually coming out with a vision for America, whereas Republicans kept their plan in secret for forever, and when we cast light upon it, there was no plan to begin with. So, just an important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, it's not like they had 7-8 years or anything to get ready.
Yeah,
It kind of shows they have no real policy substance behind their thought.
Right.
So, on a pretty entertaining note, Senator Orrin Hatch
Of Utah.
Yep, he released a pun-filled statement, which I definitely approve of. Big pun guy. I'm a pundit, you could say. That announces his plan to roll out the MEDS Act, a joint effort to allow more research into medical marijuana. And that's honestly something I'm completely in favor of. The marijuana in general is demonized as this deadly entity that shreds brain cells. It's completely not true. If there's if there's a drug out there that's actually doing that to people, it's alcohol.
Of
and
course.
that's illegal.
Yeah.
Yeah, weed directly itself hasn't caused any deaths. It's not as dangerous as alcohol and cigarettes, and this has been shown time and time again through various studies. Yet it's still being treated as this very dangerous drug, and the Trump administration, with Jeff Sessions especially, they're not helping that case that marijuana is not a dangerous drug. But yeah, I think like Senator Hatch said, it's high time that we start passing some sensible drug policy. Legalize marijuana.
Amen.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's also an excuse to crack down on minority communities. And it always has been ever since the war on drugs.
Of course, the war on drugs literally was started because, to harm minority communities.
Right. I mean, drugs are sold in areas where there isn't where there's a lot of strife, where there's a need for people to get away from their chaotic daily lives, and their lives are chaotic because they're poor, because they can't afford enough to eat, and the poor are disproportionately non-white. So a crackdown on drugs, when to a lot of these people, drugs are their only way out of, just awful lives. It's just it literally crushes people's lives when you arrest them and hold them for years and years and years on, a charge of possession of marijuana in such a minuscule amount. It's absolutely incredible. No matter how you personally feel about drugs and drug use, pragmatically you have to look at the situation and realize that, it is right to have government-regulated, taxed, marijuana industry in a lot of these areas, because it does eliminate. It saves money, it raises money, it's just the best way forward.
Look at Colorado; they have so much money for their schools now.
Right.
All right. So Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the White House press secretary, deemed ESPN host Jamil Hill's comments calling Donald Trump a white supremacist, which he kind of is, a fireable offense. So that's just showing the Trump administration trying to get their influence into every aspect of the media, trying to exert their control. And,
No, they said something about me. That's true. Fire her.
Right.
One thing I'm confused about, did she say this on TV or did she tweet it? Okay, she said it on TV. Did she say it on ESPN?
Yeah.
Okay, like obviously, I'm not calling for anyone to be fired. Of course not. I'm curious, how does that come up on ESPN? What were they talking about? That's a good question. I don't know. But obviously,
I ain't mad though.
It's. I understand why a network like ESPN might be not happy about their commentators dwelling into politics where it is not.
It's fine with it.
Right. Or no. Like I'm just saying. For example, right? For example, like if ESPN really was mulling it over, like to fire or not to fire, like I would understand that, like, it's a sports network. Don't bring politics into it if it's not super critical. Like I said, I don't know anything about the scene, but obviously this person should not be fired for saying that, because it echoes the sentiment of a lot of people that truly believe that Trump doesn't give a lot of thought to people of color, doesn't give a lot of thought to people that aren't white. And obviously we've seen by his comments in relating to Charlottesville that the Congress I think unanimously passed or passed a bipartisan bill calling on Trump to condemn the events in Charlottesville as condemning white supremacists and Nazis during what happened a month ago. So,
and as usual, Trump got flip-floppy on that. He was like, both sides are bad.
Right.
The white supremacists are bad. Both sides are bad.
Yep.
Which is it, Trump?
Yeah. Love Jamel's rhetoric or not, it's not far from the truth.
Yeah. And I think an interesting avenue to go down, actually, is, just because somebody doesn't work directly in politics doesn't mean that their voice shouldn't be just as relevant. So, whether you're a baker, a banker, or absolutely whatever, you should still be able to have a voice and have it be relevant.
Yeah. Could I interject? I know this is not on our docket, but I have to talk about something I saw a couple days ago.
Okay.
I don't know if you guys heard, but on CNN there was this guy named Clay Travis, who is like a well-known conservative pundit. Who cares? And he was on this show, on a woman's show. I don't know, a female commentator. I don't know her name. I think Brooke something, maybe. I can't remember quite for sure.
Hill.
Brooke Baldwin?
I know exactly where you're
going.
Okay.
Yeah. So they were talking about. What were they talking about? Kaepernick they were talking about ESPN. No, they were talking about this exact issue, I think. And this guy was saying, look, the only thing I care, the things I have loved the most that have never let me down are the First Amendment.
And boobs.
Oh my God!
She said this on national TV
with a woman anchor.
And the woman anchor and her guest, who was was on the side of Jamel Hill, they were both just flabbergasted. If you saw their expressions, it was hilarious. It wasn't funny because it was misogynist, but their expressions were of horror. She let him finish, which is more than I would have done. But she let him finish talking, and she said, I don't know how you can say something like that. on national TV.
Well,
that
she kept
you know,
trying to clarify, like, did you say boobs?
Yeah,
Like,
but she went on to say, like, this is something that, I don't know how you can say something like that on national TV, and I agree, right? Like, this casual misogyny has no place on our news network. It has no place in our country. I just wanted to bring it up because I thought it was amusing that this guy was basically, he was tossed out of the interview for saying that, and it does relate directly to this ESPN stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so something I will actually be talking about later is bipartisanship. So Trump and Democrats are offering somewhat conflicting accounts on the potential deal to protect Dreamers. I think that's been, straightened out a little bit since then, but it's still pretty vague. And, obviously we want to have some sort of deal, and if it's done through bipartisanship, so be it. I mean, the Democrats said from the beginning, the Democratic leadership said from the beginning that they will always be willing to work with Trump on certain things, and I mean, I'd be ecstatic if it actually goes through. Plus, I'm getting a little bit of glee out of seeing the Republican Party fragment over this. I'm not gonna lie.
Mitch McConnell is not happy.
All right.
He's not only done it, Trump hasn't done it once now, he's done it multiple times. And I think it'd be kind of interesting to go into why we think he's doing this.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
I know, Sam, you had talked about it being a push to get more independent support rather than Democratic support.
Yeah.
I agree with that completely. I think what little political mind Trump does have is definitely in tune with the idea that, like, in order to build up any sort of re-election coalition, if he even gets that far, is he's not going to win Democrats over. I mean, he has to understand that the amount of times he's set obstructionist Democrats or like those bad Democrats. I mean, you're not going to win people over that way. I think he's trying to get those independents, those Obama
everything.
swing voters who voted for Obama twice, were never really a strong part of the Democratic coalition,
Right.
and pull them over. I really think he's just trying to keep what support he has, keep himself on some sort of level ground, even though it's crumbling around him. I think he's being delusional, and I think we're going to talk a little bit with Zach about this later on, but this is a win for the Democrats in the sense that they're scheduling when things are going to happen. They're knowing that right now the priority is to get DACA recipients the protection they need to, halt any sort of border wall construction. But later on, they know that they're going to have to eventually fight the Republicans on something, and they're willing to do that for the sake of getting something done right now.
The beautiful thing is it makes it look like, the Democratic Congress is actually much more effective than the party that's actually in power. And it's kind of a beautiful political play. I've got to give him credit.
By the read of the pictures that we've seen of Schumer and Trump and Pelosi together versus pictures of Trump and Ryan and Mitch McConnell, it's pretty easy to tell Trump is more comfortable with Chuck Schumer than he is with either of his two Republican counterparts.
They're both in New York.
Yeah,
from New York.
I
I think they come from a similar background in the sense that they can talk about, Donald, you grew up here. Yeah, you grew up a little rich, but don't you understand? What would be good for New York is also good for for you.
So
I
something
think
that's
he's coming from that perspective.
really interesting is that when Trump wasn't president, he was doing political donations to all
He
these
was a
different-
Democrat.
Yeah,
Trump donated a lot of money to
donated
Chuck
more
Schumer.
money to
Ivanka
Schumer.
donated to
Yeah.
Democrats.
He
They
donated more money.
Booker.
Jared
donated more
Kushner's a
money.
Democrat.
Yeah.
Technically.
He donated more money to Schumer than any other politician in the entire country.
So if anyone, I'm going to quote this from a podcast. If anyone can talk Trump off the ledge, it's Chuck Schumer, and that's what we're seeing right now. Where Trump is saying that we're going to phase out DACA, even though he was probably purposely vague on what he was going to do, or why he did it, or what he wanted for DACA. Like, the general assumption was that Trump didn't want DACA to exist, right? And I think with these deals becoming publicized, we obviously can tell that Chuck Schumer's saying, how about we do this instead, and maybe we'll give you some we'll do this in exchange for increased quote unquote border security. Obviously, we have to know more about the details of that because they can be pretty concerning, especially what direction is this going to take for the border patrol and for immigration and custom enforcement. Then that's whether that's going to be something we have to fight for again. But at the moment, we are cautiously optimistic to see that our Democratic leaders can just go in there and try and sway Trump any way that they can. Of course, throughout all of this, we have to express caution. Like, Trump is still a systematic threat to our democracy. We have not forgotten any of the things he has said about people of color, about people that are disabled, about women, and about, immigrants. So that's just kind of the message right now from all of us, I think.
So an interesting political pivot that Trump made. So I'm assuming this has to do with the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey and Irma. But the Trump administration is putting out mixed messaging about whether they're going to stay in the Paris climate deal. And this was something that they, said before that they're going to get out of. So I can only assume that, they're starting to realize maybe that, I think it has to do with the politics of it. People realize that climate change is having these kinds of results, and it makes the Trump administration look really bad if they don't do anything about it. And there's also this sort of hilarious / super depressing side of Trump getting rid of hurricane infrastructure policy 2 weeks before Harvey. So
I mean, I think it's partial ignorance and partial just saying that it's bad for business for us to have to care about the environment and have to spend more money on environmental protection for consumers and for our workers and for everything related to our business. I think it's the standard Republican approach to business in the sense that it doesn't matter if we pollute streams, it doesn't matter if we pollute the air, it doesn't matter if we give people cancer in some cases. If we're making a buck by doing it, then we'll do it. And that's sad to say because, you're literally destroying the planet, destroying the only thing that we have, that we all share, regardless of our political ideology, regardless of what country we're from. And you're willing to throw that away for some short-term profits. I think and I joked with you guys earlier about Trump not knowing what the Paris deal was, thinking it was the U.S. government trying to buy the Paris hotel and casino or something like that. But I think he honestly does not know what's in it. I think that if someone sat him down like Schumer or someone and told him the planet is literally dying, these are simple steps that we can do that will, yes, in the short run diminish profits for businesses, but in the long run actually improve our economy.
Right.
Then we can do this. I think if you sat down with him like you would a child, you could honestly get him to understand that. And I think that's maybe possibly what we're seeing, but I think he's also, once again, listening to the last person who's in the room and kind of switching his mind every day.
he's a human Dory.
Oh my god.
Okay.
For real.
But I think that's where we find ourselves right now. So I wouldn't count out fully that he's not going to pull out, but I think it's definitely a possibility that he does.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess my thing from the business person's perspective, with global warming within, the next 50, 100 years, a lot of the coastal cities are going to be flooded, and there's a lot of business and stuff to be made there. You can't do business if the earth is flooded.
Yeah. And another thing for business is that renewable energy is a sector that's growing insanely quickly.
Exactly.
I actually have a good amount of money invested in it, and it keeps on growing. And
You talk about China beating us. That's what they're beating us in.
Yeah, I honestly think, and I think that Trump, he sees the Paris climate accords and he hears headlines saying climate change making hurricanes worse. I think he honestly thinks that if he keeps the U.S. in the Paris Climate Agreement, that the hurricanes will stop. I legitimately think that's his mindset, and he wants people to not be hit by hurricanes like we all do. And I think that's what he thinks will happen. Obviously, I'll take any reason for us to not pull out of those accords, but all of this is just the underlying theme in all of this is Trump has a fundamental misunderstanding of how things work and how certain executive decisions affect our economy. Sure, complying with these regulations will cost money, and it may cause a dip in the economy. The effects of climate change will literally be worse than catastrophic for our economy. Literally worse. The only other word I can say is biblical. A biblical catastrophe of biblical proportions. So that's just kind of my take on this to round it out.
so I'm sure a lot of you might have already seen a picture of Trump greeting 11-year-old Frank Ignacio as he mowed the lawn at the White House.
Why is an 11-year-old mowing the lawn of the White House.
I think I heard on the news that his dad works there and he brought him to work and he wanted to help out. I just think it's cute. I think it's a little break from the constant political just madness that we have going on. And I mean it was just kind of funny because I saw some people online who weren't just not aware of the context of the picture. They saw Trump trying to jokingly wrestle the mower away from the kid, and they were like, "How could he? He's just trying to have some fun." But I just think it was a really cute thing that popped up on my timeline.
I didn't know Trump was using child labor.
Oh my god!
I mean, I was about to ask, aren't there botanists working at the White House? Why are there 11-year-olds mowing the lawn?
You hire a botanist to mow your lawn?
You guys don't?
Oh my god.
I feel like it's a little overqualified for the job, to be honest with you.
Maybe.
I don't know how many of y'all know who juggalos are.
Oh my gosh!
But, so, they actually held a rally in Washington to essentially demonstrate, we're not a gang, we're, a peaceful organization, we're not terrorists or anything like that.
But they weren't the biggest draw, though, because the same day there was the MORE rally, which is the, what is it, what was the acronym again?
I forgot.
The most
Mother of all rallies.
Mother of all rallies, yeah.
With 1,000 people.
And I heard they had actually planned for 1 million at this event and only gotten 1,000.
Sure.
Sounds familiar.
It sounds familiar.
Yeah, 1 million makes sense. Sure. Yeah.
But we had watched right before we started recording a clip of they invited the president of Black Lives Matter in New York to come speak.
DC.
It was New York.
He said New York.
It was New York.
Yeah.
Oh.
But I mean, he was speaking a lot of truth that we agree with. Policies that we all agree with, and it was very strange for us to see this because it's not a type of dialogue that we see very often. And he was being heckled by the crowd for saying things, like Black lives do matter. We have to realize that people are killed every day by crooked cops. And when we say that, we're not saying that we hate all cops as a movement. We're saying that we dislike crooked cops.
Right.
And it's something that people should be able to get behind regardless of what their ideology is or where they're from or what the color of their skin is. But it's fueled by ignorance. It's fueled by just a lack of knowledge and a refusal of some people on that side to see perceptions of others.
Yeah, and I saw this video as well. Because it was strange, because there was moments he would talk about, I'm an American and I believe in liberty.
People
and
would
stuff.
cheer.
And the audience
yeah.
would cheer, and he was like, "There's things we need to improve," and they would also cheer for that.
We need to work together, stuff like that.
But then when he brought up the issue of black people systemically being targeted and shot by the police, they got silent all of a sudden. They're like, "Oh, I'm afraid to do that."
Not just that, they booed.
Yeah, they booed.
Not everyone, but some people did boo or left the event.
I mean, people are literally booing. Hey, we shouldn't have bad cops, and they're getting booed because they are so entrenched in their beliefs that beliefs that are being fed to them by the far right, Fox News, Infowars, Breitbart, that are all saying things like minorities hate cops. Minorities hate cops. They think that when cops pull over drunk drivers, that it's wrong. When cops stop sexual assaults, that minorities think it's bad. And that's the information that they're being fed from all sides of the conservative of the hard right spectrum.
And it was like the activist said in the video himself, Black Lives Matter isn't anti-cop, it's anti-bad cops. Yeah, anti-bad cop.
Yeah, and he got booed for that.
So something that's really relevant is that in St. Louis, there are large protests and essentially rioting that have been going on over the last couple of days because another cop who killed an African American who did not deserve to be went free, and it's just indicative for the umpteenth time of the really systemic problem in the judiciary system in regards to African Americans. So, I mean, I don't think the violence is necessarily the best way to handle it, but dang, do I understand that frustration.
Yeah.
It's like Martin Luther King Jr. said, riots are the language of the unheard.
Yep, amen to that. All right, so that's it for this week.
For the first half.
Okay, for the first.
No, we're done.
Okay.
That's it for the first half. Up next, we are going to have the great Zachary Price come on board and talk to us about whatever he's going to come talk to us about. Hey everyone, welcome back to the pod. Here in the studio today, we have Zachary Price, former legislative intern, liberal Democrat. Hey Zach, how are you?
I'm doing pretty alright. How are you guys doing?
We're doing good.
We're doing
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
So Zach, what have you come to talk to us about today?
I'm here to talk a little bit about bipartisanship, actually. I think it's probably the most important issue that we sort of have to confront as a nation right now. Especially at the federal level, Obamacare markets, for example, are just absolutely failing. And there's a reason they are, but they need stabilization, they need reform. It wouldn't be very hard to do. There's bipartisan support for it, but instead of doing that, the Republican Party is currently pursuing the Graham-Cassidy amendment and trying to force through partisan healthcare reform, again, for what feels like 150th time in the last 6 months. And that's just really indicative and representative of, I feel like, where Congress is right now, that there's almost no one left who actually cares about bipartisanship and prioritizes it enough to try and pass laws in a bipartisan way. Now, the Democratic Party is definitely also a problem, that they're doing basically the same thing, but they're not in power, so it doesn't really matter that Democrats aren't trying to be bipartisan. They couldn't be if they tried, So I think that unless the Democratic Party and the Republican Party can come together on key issues, then Congress is going to come to a complete standstill within the next 5 years, because you're seeing more moderate and more bipartisan legislators get primaried again and again. You're seeing this. Both Bob Corker from Tennessee and Jeff Flake from Arizona, and actually also Dean Heller from Nevada, have all earned primary challengers, Republican primary challengers, based on the fact that those people are too moderate. And man, I don't think of any of the three of them as moderate legislators. So I'm just personally very afraid of what happens if the Republicans win, if those more conservative legislators continue winning in the Republican primaries and make their way into the Senate. There's not going to be any way to come to bipartisan solutions on things like immigration reform, on healthcare, on any international issue, and those are all issues that have to be addressed in a bipartisan manner, or we're going to have real issues, and we're not going to have people continue to put their faith in Congress. And when people lose faith in their form of government, that's when you see governments fail. So I think that's a real issue on the federal level. Now, having worked a little bit in the Texas legislature, I think that our federal legislators could take a real look at Texas as an example for what needs to be done. Now, this is the only time I would ever advocate for Texas as a model for the federal government, because we're bad at getting stuff done here, guys. But when you look at especially the Texas House and the moderate faction of the Texas House, your Joe Strauss, Byron Cook, Charlie Guerin, Dan Huberty, those guys, those old white guys versus the other ones, you have that they all championed bipartisan reforms to actually help people in the last legislative session, which was not anything. It was just not what the Senate did, and it's not what the more conservative faction of the Texas House did. So you had things like mental health funding, which was championed by Price, no relation, and you had attempts at bipartisan immigration work, which didn't actually work out, and you had bipartisan education reform, which got stopped by the Senate, but Dan Huberty was crucial to that. And if we find a way to continue electing more moderate legislators, then I think there's a real chance for bipartisan reform. But as long as as long as big money donors like Mercer and the Koch brothers continue to fund the most conservative people that stumble into their offices, then you're going to have issues with moderate legislators being able to get elected, with them being able to stay in office, even ones with great track records. So I really fundamentally believe that that Texas can be a model in this way, but also that I'm afraid it's going to go the same way Congress has been going for the last few years. And one way I think that this can be addressed, actually, this is a little bit of a segue, but is to get big money out of politics. Especially getting rid of things like dark money, getting rid of super PACs. It makes it a lot harder for one big money donor to buy out an entire legislative body based on their own ideological interests. But as it's going right now, there are a handful of donors that basically make all the calls right now on who gets elected, even at the state level, and what they believe and what they talk about, because everyone is so afraid of a primary challenge. This is less of a problem in the Democratic Party, but I could definitely see that becoming a big problem for the Democrats unless a bipartisan big money in politics reform happens soon. And I honestly don't see it happening. That's and the other thing that I think is going to be that could be really crucial for bipartisanship here in Texas is the 2018 election. Right now we have a Senate that is absolutely out of control, being led by our lieutenant governor, who is absolutely out of control, and our governor doesn't care. He either just doesn't take issue with the awful things they're doing, or actively encourages it. So I think the 2018 election could be crucial. So I can't imagine how productive the Texas House could be if they had a governor that was championing the reforms that they're trying to make. You know, I mean, imagine if the more moderate legislators in the House, and to an extent in the Senate, but iffier, had someone who actually had their back on major issues, who was popular in the state. Instead, we have someone right now who he waited months. Governor Abbott waited months to take a position on the bathroom bill, for example. Waited a long time to take an issue on the Show Me Your Papers and all that. And if you have a governor who's not paying attention for the 3 months that we're in session, then it's really hard to convince the other legislators and your own voters that the reforms are something worth doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Zach, I recall a conversation you and I had earlier during last year's election. I had been canvassing for Allison Alter, and we were talking about that race. I wasn't super familiar with it, but you expressed, that you were content that Miss Alter won, but you were a little bit discontent that people like Sherry Gallo, is that how you pronounce it? Sherry Gallo were elected out, and you said that could have been a precursor to just eliminating genuinely, even if we disagree with a lot of Gallo's positions, genuinely responsible legislators. Does that come into are you thinking about that also when you are talking about bipartisanship and eliminating more moderate elements of both parties?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those not familiar, the Austin City Council right now is comprised of 9 Democrats and 1 Republican. They run in a nonpartisan fashion, but that's how they identify, at least. Before that, there were 2 council members who were both Republicans that got knocked out in the 2016 election. Don Zimmerman, who's awful.
Thank God.
Who we are all in agreement that we don't want him on city council.
Truly one of the worst people in politics.
Oh yeah.
And Sherry Gallo, who's a very moderate Republican, voted for things like the big transportation bond and all that. But I think that having a moderate Republican in a place like the Austin City Council is useful. It is useful to talk about things like making sure that Austin keeps a conservative budget, and making sure that just keeping a healthy debate there. I'm not saying that Austin should have a Republican city council. That would be absolutely not representative. But the area that she represents was moderately conservative, I would say, and so it made sense to have a moderately conservative city council member representing that area. Now, I'm actually a big fan of Allison Alter from all the stuff she talked about in the campaign. I think she's incredibly qualified, and so far, at least, it seems like she's doing a pretty good job. But it was just a broader point about the need for bipartisan conversations at all levels of government. The only Republican left on the Austin City Council, Ellen Troxclair, isn't really the type to have like a healthy conversation and is way more incendiary in the way that she talks about issues and the way that she debates, and it's not healthy. And having someone like Sherry Gallo on the city council, even when I disagreed with her at times or even a lot of the time, was really healthy because it gave you perspective for how people who don't identify as Democrats in the city are feeling, and also just makes you think harder about the issues you're proposing and all that, and make sure that they actually work. Because when you don't have a strong and healthy debate on the issues, that's when we put out laws that haven't been thought through all the way and they fail. So yeah, that was sort of what I was getting at in that conversation, Marco.
I guess you want to talk first, Nick?
Yes, I guess this is just a very generic question, but what effect do you think gerrymandering has on bipartisanship?
That's a good question. Gerrymandering is 1A to the worst problem we have in politics. Not the worst problem we have, because I already said that's not bipartisanship, and I can't go back now, just 12 minutes in. But
You can't quite make it number 2, so that's 1A.
Yeah, it's 1A.
It's bullet point.
Yeah, that's a good question, Nick. I think that gerrymandering has a pretty strong effect, actually, on bipartisanship, especially in areas that get gerrymandered into being way, like, massively Democratic or massively liberal, or massively conservative. It's really hard for an elected representative to take bipartisan or moderate positions on issues, because if 70% of your voters are going to be voting in the Republican primary, then you've got to be way more worried about a Republican primary challenger than a Democratic challenger, and vice versa. Lloyd Doggett isn't ever worried about a Republican challenger, but he might be worried about someone challenging him from the left here in Austin. So I think gerrymandering has a big effect, but it can also, not gerrymandering per se, but setting up more balanced districts would be a very easy way to return us to at least some form of moderation. You can look at Will Hurd, for example, in South Texas. His district actually recently got ruled unconstitutional, but it's the most moderate district in Texas, and he's the most moderate congressman in Texas. I don't think that's like a mistake. He's intentionally. I actually met with his chief of staff while I was in D.C. a couple summers ago. His chief of staff's a Democrat. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
His chief of staff's a Democrat, and a lot of the issues that they champion are a lot more moderate. Now, I didn't agree with everything that we talked about. They weren't huge fans of Obama, but they seem to actually care about moderate bipartisan reforms on immigration, on technology, on education, on issues that were important to us when we went. And I don't feel like I hear that type of desire for bipartisan reform from other congressmen in more conservative districts, like Lamar Smith, who represents me in West Campus, for example.
Yeah.
I guess to kind of break up the moderate love fest that's kind of
Oh
festering.
boy. Andrew's on the hunt.
There is definitely a time for bipartisanship. Like I am all for that on a whole host of issues. Like right now, Rand Paul, for instance, is working with Kamala Harris on a bill to reform the American cash bail system, which is basically a way in which people who are either wealthy or in a lot of cases white have an easier time getting out of short-term felony sentences while waiting for their court date than minorities and low-income people tend to have. So that's an issue where bipartisanship is perfectly fine. Improving veterans' health care, Democrats and Republicans use that as their running point all the time. Usually doesn't end up being anything substantive, but the idea that you're moving to do that is great. even in some ways, tax reform is bipartisan. In a lot of ways, infrastructure and investing in trade, in manufacturing jobs is important, and those are bipartisan issues. But I also see a lot of areas where politically and policy-wise, we need to not be so gradual. I think the American people are tired of gradualism because of what it ends up meaning is that it takes us 20 to 30 years to solve an issue, that if we only pushed right when we had the chance, we could put a policy into place that gains the support of the American people because of how good it is, just policy-wise, statistically, fiscally-wise. The main way that I would point that out is single-payer healthcare. The Democrats had control of Congress with Obama. They had a tremendous mandate to do whatever they wanted to do to help the American people. He said on that stage, after he had won the election, that change had come to America, and it hadn't. They offered concession after concession to Republicans who would have just repealed Obamacare light, like we're seeing right now anyway. They tried to make it something that was palatable to everyone, and it's not. Democrats, independents, and Republican voters all hate the system that is Obamacare. They don't hate the idea of it, which is improving coverage, improving quality of healthcare, but they hate the way that it came out. And, the Democrats had control of the House and they had control of Congress. And yes, there were some legislative things in committees that stopped aspects of it from getting, put into place, or, judicial rulings that stopped aspects of it from coming into place. But if we had moved forward with the single-payer healthcare system then, if Democrats had the courage, the conviction, and had not taken the money that prevented them from doing that, I think we would have seen a system that people, like we're seeing right now, 70 to 60% of people supporting it, people would be happy with. We would not be fighting right now over whether or not 30 million people in our country deserve healthcare or not. So that's an issue where I think that, and that's due to a lot of the things you're talking about, gerrymandering and polarization of parties. Obviously, it's not just a Republican issue. There's also Democrats to blame. But even if we're talking, locally here in Austin, like you were mentioning with Sherry Gallo and Allison Alter, I also campaigned for Allison Alter through the coordinated campaign that Travis County Democratic Party was doing. Wouldn't you rather have a Democrat, though, than a Republican who's not going to support LGBTQ ordinances or who's not going to support, increasing disability access in a lot of places? I guess the key that I'm saying here is if we come out of this with the mindset that just because an area is traditionally more conservative, that it should be represented by a conservative, then we're going to see the same sort of politics and strategies that the Democratic Party has had, where we leave states like Montana alone, right? We just leave them to the Republicans, or we leave states like North Dakota and South Dakota to Republicans. And to me, that just seems Texas, in a lot of ways, although it is getting a lot more play nationally since Hillary Clinton was polling better here. Whether you believe that's because she's more moderate or not is another issue, but the idea that we can win these states that we've been leaving to Republicans is absolutely true. And the idea that we can flip districts that are traditionally more conservative, like we did with Sherry Gallo's district, is good. Because even though we don't have a Republican in there, if these people feel like a Democrat is going to represent them and they elect a Democrat, then allow them to elect a Democrat and let that person pass things that overall are better for the city.
How long have you been holding that in there, Andrew?
The 15 minutes now you guys have been talking about.
So I've got a question too. So you're talking about there, not being much bipartisanship right now. So what's your take on Trump working with Schumer and Pelosi on stuff like DACA, Harvey Aid, raising the debt ceiling?
Yeah, we talked about
etc.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, Paris Climate Accord and stuff.
I want to interject. Zach, do Andrew's part first, because I know you have a lot to say. I can see you
I wasn't
making...
even sure if that was a question or a point.
Andrew's comment was just like a rebuke on my very existence.
Okay,
I agree with a lot of what you said.
So Zach, start with Andrew and then answer Sam's question, and then we'll probably be done.
Yeah, okay. So, no, you're absolutely right, Andrew. And when I was talking...
All right, cut off the spot. We're good.
When I was talking, I more meant that we need to elect people who are willing to work in a bipartisan way, not that we should necessarily always advocate for bipartisan policies. I think there's a difference between the two. So there are issues fundamentally where the Democratic Party needs to step up and help people that the Republicans aren't going to go along with ever. I don't think you're going to get more than a couple of federal legislators. I don't think you have more than a couple of federal legislators who are willing to raise the minimum wage from the Republican Party ever. Even if you make it the most moderate place on earth, it's still going to be a couple who are willing to talk about raising the minimum wage tops. They're just issues where Democrats, if given power, have to address it on their own and all that. I mean, and they can reach out to the Republicans, but without making concessions. I think you're absolutely right that there are issues that need to be advocated for to help people in a completely partisan way, and that's fine. But what we really fundamentally need are more legislators who are willing to work with people of the other party. I disagree with Rand Paul on 95% of all issues, all the time. But I respect Rand Paul, because on the other 5% of issues, he's willing to work with people of the other party. He's willing to do basically whatever it takes to make sure that his reforms work and help people. I mean, I respect that, even if I disagree with him all of the rest of the time on everything he ever says, and his haircut.
I can throw that in there.
What is going on though with that? Really,
Oh,
honestly,
goodness.
Gonna slam Rand Paul's haircut.
It's always a good day to slam Rand Paul's haircut.
Yeah, okay, so we were talking about the city council is actually a little bit personal for me because Sherry Gallo represented my high school. So I really know the district well. I'm not saying that Democrats shouldn't be elected to more conservative areas. They should be. I was glad to see Allison Alter win because it was an example of progress in my mind. I was like, wow, this area of very wealthy, conservative-ish Austin was able to elect someone who was strongly liberal like Allison Alter, and then Jimmy Flanagan did the same thing to Don Zimmerman even farther north near my house, which is even more conservative. I was thrilled. But at the same time, I was sad to see Sherry Gallo not on the city council as a voice of moderation. That's it. So I'm not saying that I would have voted or campaigned for Sherry Gallo, for example, because I disagree with her on a lot of issues like LGBT rights, for example. BLT rights. No.
Nice job, Trump.
Thank you. On LGBT rights, for example.
Yeah.
But I do think that having voices of moderation is important, and I was just more sad to see her go in a much more theoretical way, I suppose. But yeah, I agreed with most of what you just laid down a minute ago.
Okay.
To your question,
Who talking about?
Did he even ask the question?
Yeah, he asked the question.
Okay.
could you post?
Yeah, could you?
Okay, yeah, for sure. So basically, what do you think? You were saying that bipartisanship is kind of in a serious decline right now, and now that Trump is working with Democrats, Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi on things like DACA, Harvey Aid, raising the debt ceiling, God knows what else at this rate. What's your take on that avenue of bipartisanship?
You know what? I'll take it. I'm not hugely thrilled. I'm not hugely thrilled that Trump is our president.
Understatement.
Me
of the
neither.
century.
Me neither.
Hey guys, Trump is not that good.
Hot take here, guys. Trump is bad.
Actually, if you give him some time,
Give him a chance.
give him a chance.
Anyway.
So, no, he's not great, but I am really glad to see him reach out to the Democrats and work on bipartisan reform. And I think that this is happening now entirely because of who Trump is and his approval ratings. And I don't think it would be happening if Ted Cruz were in office, if Marco Rubio were in office, if any other Republican from that primary, short of, maybe Lindsey Graham, I don't even know. Someone who pulled it 0.5% or something.
I guess the key there is this: if any Republican had been elected, which he isn't. I mean, he invaded their party. He's brought this new brand that they're desperately trying to get rid of because it's bad for business, it's bad for politics, and he has no ideological line that he's really towing. He flip-flops every day. And I think what we're seeing is actually, I'll give some praise to congressional leadership on this. I think they're the ones who are actually bringing him to the table, telling him probably behind the scenes, like, look, if you want to get anything done during your first term at all, because he has nothing so far, if you want to get anything done, you have to work with us. You have to give us something right now, and we'll give you something later, which in some ways is bad. Because as we've seen with the DACA stuff, the wall is not gone. He plans to pursue it later, but right now he's just kind of putting it off the table. But in other ways, it's good. Marco and I were talking about this the other day and saying, it is a win for the Democrats in the sense that this is the best that they can do right now.
Right.
Is take the wins that they can get and fight later on the policies that they know Trump is going to continue pushing, but that are disastrous.
I just want to make a point about Obamacare that you mentioned earlier, Andrew. There were a lot of concessions made, a lot of compromises made, a lot of frustrating compromises made, and then there were further defeats in the court system, the individual mandate, so on and so forth. But at its core, we don't love everything about Obamacare, but it still did a lot of good for the American people. I'm not sure how the exact number that were insured, but it must have been over 10 or 20 million.
I want to say it was around like 26 million.
26 million. Okay, so a lot of millions of Americans, and it's like Zach said earlier too. We push through these things when we have majorities, and even though it's partisan, it's heated. It gets the ire of the other side, and then they vow to destroy it as soon as they get into office. But once the American people see the effects of what we've done, what Democrats do, or what just really the good effects of a governing party, then they become resistant to want to eliminate it. I mean, love or hate Obamacare, whether you think Obamacare is, super conservative or whatnot, I mean, the American people don't want to get rid of it. And part of the reason...
Because it's not being framed as a system in itself that works, and people are like, oh, I love Obamacare.
No.
They just love the idea of having health insurance, which is why they're fighting so hard.
But there are still the millions of Americans that literally have the insurance, and they want to get rid of it, not because it's an idea, but because, hey, this is health insurance that I have, and don't take it away from me. Because I don't think anyone of us here is insured on Obamacare, and that's kind of like the privilege we have. But other people, they want to keep it because it gives them health insurance.
My parents are insured though.
I think I had mine are too.
Okay.
I was actually last year.
Oh, okay. So I was totally wrong there. I'm sorry. That's totally completely wrong.
Wrong.
Sorry, I was fake news there for a second. But you know what I mean? Like, we pass through these things that are going to be unpopular, that are going to not have a single Republican vote. But once Americans see what good it does, then they're not going to want to get rid of it. My final statement here, just to paraphrase what Nancy Pelosi said, you have to pass something to see what's in it. And that's not a stupid thing to say.
Yes,
it's the
it
truth.
is.
No, but
It's
it's
extremely
but I'm sorry, but it's the truth. The American people don't know what it is because they're being misled by the other side. But once we pass it, they know what's in it. They know that it insures their children up to age 26. They know that it provides patient protections for them. So now that they know what it is because we passed it, they don't want to get rid of it. And it hasn't been able to be gotten rid of. So that's what I'm trying to say. I mean, it's poorly phrased, but the sentiment is exactly the same. So
real quick, I'm going to take issue with something you said, Andrew.
Yeah.
You said first term, Trump's first term.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's make it his only.
We're gonna have a real problem here if you think Trump's gonna have.
I don't. But what I'm saying is he's already viewing himself as being a two-term president, so you have to work with him based on that ideology.
I understand. You just said that, and I physically cringed.
Yeah, don't worry.
it's Trump's term.
I lie. His a quarter of a term. Hopefully.
Yeah, it's Trump's year.
Yeah, okay.
He started raising money for his next run.
He's already had campaign rally.
Literally
it's
right
insane.
after he got elected.
Yeah. Preaching to the choir.
I came here to not think about Trump, actually. So let's...
Yeah.
It's all Trump all the time here on Trending Left. Zach, closing statement.
Closing statement.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that there are concrete ways where we could fix bipartisanship. Bringing back pork barrel spending, for example, would, even though it's widely hated by the majority of people from both parties, bringing back that type of thing and congressional earmarks, I think would be the easiest way to allow legislators to get more moderate votes without having their congressional district absolutely riot on them. But beyond that, we just need to have more productive bipartisan conversations as a country, I think. I feel like, forgive me for saying this, but we're all in a bubble sometimes, or in an echo chamber, and for example, we're all liberals. Hello. I mean, not this podcast, but we need to have fundamentally more bipartisan conversations as a country, with our friends, with our family members, and make them happen in a productive way. And if that happens, then you'll see, I think, that we actually agree on more issues than you think. I have a strongly conservative friend who last year, I spent all of last year talking to her about her politics and trying to figure out the issues we agree on. And it turns out that she and I agree on the exact same immigration reform, even though she's one of the most conservative people I know. So and I am not exactly conservative. So I think that's a concrete example of how just productive conversations with people you disagree with can make a small change. And hopefully when she and I are in Congress together, we'll pass that bipartisan immigration reform, because Congress isn't going to touch that for the next 40 years. So yeah, that's where I think I'll end it. Thanks, guys.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Zach, thanks for coming on, man. We enjoyed our conversation with you. And to the viewers, listeners, thanks for listening to the episode 3 Trending Left. We'll be back next week, same time, same place.